Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm a few minutes late this morning. My dog's not behaving herself. I hope you're all well. There is a lot to talk about. So there's a lot going on, and a lot that I could be talking about. But I did say that I'd address a certain issue, and I'll do that first this morning. And this was about a tweet that I sent out last week, which, after speaking in Oxford, I said that I had spoken about Indigenous Europeans. And it got a response. Uh, the response was, or some part of them, it was largely supportive, but some people responded with what I can only describe as the overreaction that usually occurs when people mention anything to do with Indigenous Europeans. And that reaction, that overreaction, that jump to racism or even jump to Nazism is proof, really, of part of the point that I'm trying to make, which is that we can talk about the indigenous peoples of other countries. We can certainly talk about indigenous or as Native Americans, uncontroversially known as Native Americans in the US, indigenous peoples in Canada and Australia and New Zealand. But the moment you get to talk about the concept of an indigenous European, people jump straight to racism and hatred and Nazism. And that indeed is part of the problem and part of the argument that I'm trying to make. A couple of people want me to define what's meant by indigenous. And it's a fairly fluid, it's a fairly debatable kind of word. I think people will have different definitions of it, but one of the dictionary definitions of it is quite poetic to me. It simply says "not from somewhere else." And if we put that into the context of ethnicity, which is what we are talking about, it would be someone who is of the ethnic majority of a particular country, a particular European country in this context. It's not about citizenship. It's not about equal rights. Of course, we're all equal British citizens. It's not about equal rights for all. Of course, we all have the same equal rights. It's about ethnicity, and only when we talk about white ethnicity does it become controversial, and does hatred start getting thrown around. Look, I'll just give you an example of what we sort of mean by this in broader terms. I give my sister had a quick research through our ancestry, the surnames of our four grandparents, and found Scottish, English, and Irish influence in there. Apparently, my surname is Scottish. And goes back quite a long way in Scotland, and so I think that would make me ethnically of these islands, and I don't understand why that's controversial. I don't understand why it's controversial to address any ethnic European group like the Spaniards or Scandinavians, but it does, and we jump straight to hatred. Now, the reason I am talking about this, one, I think because there's a bubbling away. There's a confusion by white people in Europe as to why their ethnic identity is so roundly condemned, and so why are Europeans spoken about in the way that they are. And I'm going to tell you just a few. I did a quick Google this morning. On anti-white articles, anti-white headlines, or just I'll let you decide if they're anti-white, but just a few headlines that I've found in a quick glance over the last year or so in major newspapers. It's not sort of alternative press, it's a major newspaper. So one of them is University Stands by Problem of Whiteness course. A university is teaching a course about the problem of whiteness. Those are the words used, the problem of whiteness. Another headline, police stand guard outside Florida University class on white racism. So there's another university teaching a class which, of course, expands the poison that whites are all racist and full of hate and the usual stuff. Another headline, Commission, this is the European Commission, of course, the EU is too white. Another headline, school marked down by Ofsted for being too white. Theresa May Another headline, Theresa May, police forces are too white. Another headline, dear white people, please stop pretending reverse racism is real. It's literally impossible to be racist to a white person. Another one in The Guardian, we're all racist, but racism by white people matters more. Now, there's a theme here. There's a theme here. And people are getting angry. I think people are becoming more aware of this. And believe it or not, most white people are not full of hatred for other racial groups, but don't understand and will not accept for much longer, I suspect, why the rules don't apply to white people as well. Why is it acceptable to hate us and not any other racial group? And I agree, it isn't acceptable to hate people based on their race, but I include white people in that. This is where the problem is. It's a complete lack of consistency. This is an obvious attack, and it's widespread. It's at all levels, and we're not. And demonstrative of this is the fact that we're not able to talk about the concept of a European ethnicity or a European Indigenous people. And I explained what it means in sort of broader terms. It means not from somewhere else, but in short terms, yes, in one word, it does. Indigenous European does mean white. In this era of our time, where perhaps we can go back tens of thousands of years and things will be different. But in this era, the one we live in, this part of history that we live in, it is completely justifiable to describe Indigenous whites as the Indigenous people of Europe. It doesn't give us any greater rights. It doesn't mean that we have any right to oppress anyone else or that other people are not our equal citizens. But it does give us a right to discuss things from that perspective, just as other racial groups and just as other ethnic groups or religious groups can discuss things from their perspective. So should white people be allowed to, without immediately being accused of hatred. And there's a reason that we need to talk about Indigenous, whether or not white people are the Indigenous people of Europe. And I know the minefield I'm walking in here, by the way. I know the minefield I'm walking in here. But to have that debate, if you look, and I talk about it, the reason this actually came up in Oxford was because I talk about it quite a bit in my book and the importance of it. And the fact that not a minor aspect of, but a major, major drive in the Islamization, a major tactic, a major weapon in the Islamization of the West and the dismantling of democracy in the West by the left and its alliance with Islam is the denigration and demonization of the white majority. It is important. But why it's important is whether or not we can call ourselves Indigenous is because the rights that apply to Indigenous populations, including right to protection of their culture. These are rights guaranteed by the United Nations, and I talk about this quite a bit in my book. I'm not going to give every bit of it away, so you'll have to read the book. But the UN definition of Indigenous is very interesting, and it knowingly excludes the possibility that white people could ever be described as the Indigenous of Europe. I'll leave you to read the book to learn more about that, but this is important. It's important. And there's another reason it's important, is that if we don't talk about it, someone else will. And if you think that if you have some weird idea that we're some kind of extremists, absolute nonsense. We are moderate, reasonable voices who want to discuss these issues. They are taboo issues, which is one of the reasons they must be discussed, but they must be discussed by decent people, or not so decent people will get hold of them, and they will get the power that will come with open and honest discussion about these taboo issues. Okay, I think I will leave that one there. I don't want to be here for too long. But one last thing to say, and that is about the protest coming up on Saturday and other activities going on during the week. I'll be leafleting again in Lewisham every evening this week, from morning on Saturday evening and all day on Sunday. But I will be leaving. I will be going from at 3:00 on Saturday. I will be going from Lewisham to Whitehall to show my support. I think to show my support to Tommy generally, or to Tommy specifically, to people generally who are persecuted for their criticism of Islam. And to share a stage again. I'll be honoured to speak on the same stage again as Geert Wilders. I spoke alongside him in Australia a few years ago, and this incredibly brave man who is coming here to show his support for the critics of Islam. That's what this is about. It's for those of us who criticise Islam. We need to stand together and protest against the widespread persecution and the persecution of Tommy Robinson throughout his political career is one major example of this. So I'll be there to protest against that. Okay, that really is it for me this morning. Thank you to everyone for all your help. Thank you to everyone for all your support. It's going really well. Party is continuing to grow, and I'm getting more and more excited about it all the time. Oh yes, and our campaign video for Lewisham has been posted on my Twitter and retweeted. Please retweet it. Please retweet it. We'll get that out as far and wide as we can. Okay. See you tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Take care.
We will make America great again.